And this episode of the podcast is brought to you by Beyond the Glass Slipper, Healing Women's Fairytale Wounds by Dr. Tanja Isabella. What's up, everybody? This is Buck Grant, and I wanted to take a moment to share something truly transformative with you. In our journeys to become the best versions of ourselves, we often need to look at the stories that have shaped us and how they've kept us from fully stepping to our essence. That is why I'm excited to endorse Tanya's incredible book, an ebook that just came out. And I have to tell you, she is not just a coach, she's a visionary. And this book will challenge everything you know or thought you knew about love, worthiness, and abundance. Tanja dives deeply into the fairy tales we all know and love, revealing the core wounds embedded in these stories, whether it's Cinderella's struggle with worthiness, or Ariel's sacrifice with love, or Snow White's journey through betrayal. This book really helps us uncover the stories you might be unconsciously living out, and it's time to reclaim the narrative. If you're ready to rewrite your own fairy tale and claim the love and abundance you truly deserve, click the link below and get your copy of Beyond the Glass Slipper. This is your opportunity to unlock a whole new level of self-love and feminine power, so don't miss out. And the book is free. This episode is also brought to you by the Muay Thai University Costa Rica Leadership Immersion Camp, coming in December 2025. This is something that I'm very proud about. My entire mission in martial arts has been to create leaders, to teach teachers, and to lead leaders through the art of Muay Thai. And leadership is the one skill that I believe can change the world. And before you can learn how to lead others, you have to learn how to lead yourself. So we're going to spend 7 days in Costa Rica training Muay Thai in the morning, and then accessing my abilities as a leadership and courage development coach to uncover what it means to be a leader and how to change yourself and then change the environment around you. Really excited about that. And right now we're having a Black Friday special where we're taking $1,000 off on each packet. $1,000. That'll only run until December 1st. So if there's something you're interested, click the link below and we will contact you and let you know when enrollment starts so you can save and be a part of this first time groundbreaking experience. Hi, this is Buck the Dagger.
Hello, my name is Tanja the Rose.
And this is the Dagger and the Rose podcast.
He and she conversations.
All right, everybody, welcome back. Episode 2.
Hello.
And we're coming off of a pretty interesting weekend. At the time that this is being aired, there was a somewhat historic fight in boxing that occurred this weekend. Iron Mike Tyson comes out of retirement again to fight Jake Paul, internet sensation turned boxer. Mike Tyson's 59 years old. Jake Paul, 26, I believe. Young enough to be his son. And a lot of controversy around it. We're not as particularly interested in the boxing dynamics and the strategy and all that. We're here really to talk about identity, right? Talking about how people identify themselves with the things they do, and who they are as a result of what they do. In my work in particular, men heavily identify themselves about what they do in a story about who they are in relation to essentially what I'm speaking to right now is the timeline, where they are in their timeline with that. And I'm sure you've had some experiences with women in that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I guess my first question is, what are your thoughts about identity around that fight?
Mixed. From someone who came from fighting, I understand how hard it is to walk away from your identity as being a fighter. And no one can really tell a fighter when they're done, except for the person themselves. Every fighter should have people around them that is looking at the longer version of them, the long lens, like where are they going, where are they at, and be able to have an honest conversation about, are we at the end of the line? So there's this paradox that occurs at the end of a fighter's career. Every fighter I've ever coached will get to the tail end of their career, and they always feel like they have one fight left, no matter what happened in the last fight. And people will say you're only as remembered by the last fight you had. So if you lost, they're going to remember you as a loser. And if you win, you're a winner at the time, but what have you done for me lately is kind of the narrative. So they always want to get back into the ring and get one more. There's always one more fight. And if they get the one more fight and they win, then that just reinforces their identity of, I still got it. So they have one more left. And if they lose, they want to end their career on a win. So there's this perpetual cycle of really just trying to hold on to the person that they used to be, not become the person they actually are. And we see that pretty regularly as athletes like myself. We start to get a little bit older. And particularly I see men in the 40s, my age range, although it happens all up and down the spectrum, where you feel that you're young enough to still do it, but old enough to not do it the way that you used to do when you're 20. You remember when you were 20.
Yeah.
And 20 was literally 20 some years ago. It was an adult age years ago, 25 years ago, 29 years ago. That sounds like a really long time, but I blinked.
Yeah.
And it went from 25 to 49. So yeah, it's a point of contingency for men. That's something that they all struggle. Like every client that I've had, especially at my age, has struggled trying to figure out who they're going to be in this next chapter.
Yeah, and I would imagine it doesn't happen with just fighters. Like what comes to mind is Tom Brady.
Tom Brady,
Yeah, like he ended up ending a marriage, and that ended in a separation because his wife felt a certain kind of way, where the agreement was like he would go out on a high and had won a Super Bowl one last time and had done it with a different team and had proven that he could do it again and again. And then it was like he said he was going to go into retirement. And then shortly after, he's like, I'm coming out of retirement.
Yep. Well, always got one more.
Always got one more. And then unfortunately wasn't as fruitful as it was at that point.
Sure.
So I can imagine even the greatest of the great, that's a hard thing to decide, when should that last hurrah be, or that last identity be, and how do you redefine yourself and reinvent yourself from that point?
Yeah, it becomes pretty difficult. And we're both storytellers, so we talk about storytelling in both of our lines of coaching. As cliche as it sounds, there's this idea of you've got to be able to tell a new narrative of yourself once you're transitioning. But I will acknowledge this, that when a chapter closes in your life, it feels like a death.
Yeah.
And so thus there needs to be a mourning period, which is something we don't do very well in our culture, is honor mourning.
Yeah.
Mourning is a real process that a lot of cultures had traditions around, but a lot of us tend to suffer in silence by ourselves when we're going through that mourning phase. We're told to suck it up, hide it, just pull yourself up by your bootstraps and get after it. But I think that's really important. It's really important to grieve.
Yeah.
To grieve, because you were actually experiencing a death of a former self, which is necessary for a rebirth of the next person, but you have to go through that grieving process.
And I can imagine that would happen with various things. The high school athlete that didn't make it into college, or the college person that didn't make it into the NFL. So even if you're not older, there's these chapters where it's like you have the end of this identity. And what does that mean for you? Because perhaps since childhood, you've identified with this dialogue or this narrative, and now you have to reinvent yourself. And I would imagine, for women, there might be some with that too. It's like you go from one aspect to another. It's like the the couple where it's like they've been parents and now you're an empty nester.
Mm.
And how do you identify as a couple, or how do you identify as a woman? And, how do you reinvent that relationship when the sole purpose has been child rearing and connecting and having this family, and now your children are out of the nest?
Mm.
And there's a little bit, I'm sure, that they don't talk about grief of like, okay, well, I've had this role, and how do I reinvent myself? Because I've been identified as this. And even though I still have that, the dynamic is significantly different.
Yeah.
And you do find that some relationships will fall apart after that because both people have put so much emphasis on this role.
Mm.
And now that child has left the house, and then it's this dynamic of, who are you?
Right,
What do I know about you?
Right, because again,
you're this stranger.
Yeah, like we've been together for like 30 years, and now we're in the house by ourselves, and I don't even know who you are. I don't know what you like. It's like, oh, we should start dating. I was like, where should we go? What do we even like to eat? Like, what do you even like to do? I don't even know. What do? We don't do anything other than raise children and go to work. So I imagine that's a pretty challenging factor. What are some earlier stage issues or transitions that you see women going through?
I think some of it is after childbirth. We start with the archetype of the lover, and then they go into the archetype of the mother, and they forget that they were the lover first, and they stop being the lover because they think they have to live in a world of and or. They don't feel like they could be the lover and the mother. Which
is interesting. I think in Western culture, it is expected when you have kids that you hear it all the time. The kids come first, right? And yet in many, even religious practices, they speak of like the first union, of course, is, with God. And then it's with your partner. Yeah. Like that relationship comes first, because if that's not strong, then the fruits of your labor of your children is going to be compromised. But for some reason in the West, because of this, the way we're driven towards success, towards our kids being a part of, again, of our identity, right? So we want to make sure that when people look at our kids, that they see us through them, that all of the focus goes into raising the kids. And then that relationship between the husband and wife starts to break apart. Yeah. Yeah. So I do think that is part of it. But also, I think one of the things that we've touched upon, we live in a society that is very segmented or very fragmented, that we have this, I can either be this or this. I can either be the lover or the mother. Or, I think with men and their identity, I would imagine that it's true too, that you think I have to be this. And if I'm not this, then what am I? And perhaps they can realize that it's not a matter of or, it's a matter of and. I can be this and this. If you look at, successful people, like we were talking, I think about, was it Lamborghini? He was a tractor. He made tractors. Yeah. He made tractors, and then he decided to race sports cars or make sports cars, which I think there are a lot of examples of people that can live in that world of and really challenging ourselves to say, like, we don't have to be either or. We can be multiple things. We can be multifaceted. That's what makes us very unique as humans. We can wear many hats or many crowns. And one of the things that I believe, that you are your own luxury brand, and as long as you're being authentically yourself, you're always on brand. So for example, it's like, practice dermatology, but I love fashion, and I love finance and romance, and all those things make me who I am. And I'm sure you can speak to the things that are you. Yeah. I mean, I just on the same note, like Alex Hormozy, many people like study entrepreneurship know who Alex Hormozy is. And he was teaching a course where he was, saying like, okay, look at Joe Rogan. Everyone knows who Joe Rogan is, but people know Joe Rogan differently depending on where you came from. Some people will look at Joe Rogan, for example, and go, okay, he's a comedian. And some will see him as a martial artist. And others will see him as a commentator, and they'll see him as into aliens. He's a conspiracy theorist. He's all these many things, but the one common thing he is Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
And he has all these little circles around him where people love him for maybe 2 out of the 10 things that are him. And that brings him into his sphere. And the people that like all those things, which is rare, are really big Joe Rogan fans. But no matter what, all those things are Joe Rogan's brand.
Yeah.
And some of them don't seem to be related at all, but where the way they're related through is Joe Rogan. And it's like your own personal brand can be a multitude of things that don't seem to go together, but they do go together because they exist within you. Therefore, you're always on brand if they exist within you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think there's a lot of examples of that, in society, in our world. Martha Stewart was a stockbroker before she was the Martha Stewart we know.
Yeah.
Vera Wang, I think, was an ice skater before she was a fashion designer and designed wedding gowns.
Schwarzenegger. 3 transitions: bodybuilder, actor, and then governor.
Yeah.
So complete transitions, and still him the entire time. Still showed up as him, wearing different hats, using his specific gifts. And some of the gifts are, the gifts that he used for bodybuilding are some of the same gifts that he used to become an actor. This is a man that barely spoke English when he became an actor.
Yeah.
But the hard work and the dedication and the commitment and the clear vision that he had in order to transform his body, he also transformed his mind in order to be an actor. Became one of the most iconic action heroes ever, and then using that same skill set to become the governor, as they so lovingly called him.
Yeah, and I love that. And I really, again, I think that boils down to like sacred union and divine partnership, because he was married to Maria Shriver, who happened to be a Kennedy.
So,
I'm sure growing up in politics, I'm sure she was very influential.
Yeah.
And really helping him sharpen that aspect of what it would be for him to be a man in politics.
Yeah. See a different side of himself that maybe he wouldn't have been expressed if he hadn't been with her. Yeah. Something that I think is really important for, like, and I'm speaking for men, but across the board is people realizing when they're going through this transition period, because I have a lot of men who are going through this transition right now and are suffering, right? We have courses to illustrate it. A lot of people I coach are going through this process. But one thing that's really important for them to remember is that you're not an island. You're not alone. You have people around you. You also have, if you have a good partner, someone that can see angles of you or aspects of you, the wonderful things of you that you can't see, that could help you transform into that next version of yourself. And then you also have coaches. I mean, I can't think of any situation. Like, I've always been very intentional and clear about the things that I want, right? If I wanted to be a martial artist, I found the best coaches I could find in the world, right? And which allowed me to compete and coach and transform people across the entire globe, because I found people who were doing that. I did that with my coaching. I did that with my business. And it's interesting what happens when we start talking about our personal development, right? When we start talking about our soul, our character, our life expression, there's like this disconnect where I don't need a coach for that. I should be able to figure that out. But if you got a coach for everything else, then why would you not get a coach for that? Why would you not get someone to guide you and be like, oh, hey, I've been there. I've had people be there. I've gotten them through it. Let me help you get to the other way. Yeah. Because we all know that like a good coach can shortcut your experience, or at least make it more focused. If I had to teach myself martial arts, or I had to travel around to different gyms and just try to pull things a la carte, it would take forever to get good. But then once they found a coach who was invested in me, not just the best coach in the world, but like also vested in me becoming the best version of myself, then my skill level skyrocketed. But why do you think people don't look at their personal life or their relationships as intentionally as they look at like their business or their fitness or their finances? Why do you think that that's a hole in people's experience?
I think it goes back to fairy tales, like the Cinderella story. Like you get married or in this relationship and then you just live happily ever after. Like it's just this point where it's like, and then they live happily ever after. And somehow, you're just expected that love is enough or intimacy enough or connection is enough that it's just supposed to be fruitful and be successful. But I believe with everything you do, you have intention. You know, whether it's like, I'm going to graduate from high school or I'm going to graduate from college or I'm going to succeed in this career. It's like you have goals and dreams and desires with every other aspect.
Right.
And I think one of the fairy tale illusions is like you're taught, for example, maybe making it to the altar is success.
Right.
Or maybe just having a passionate relationship is success. But then what after that? And I think just like anything, if you don't have intentionality or desire or even communicate what your common goals or dreams or desires or wishes or what that looks like, you don't even communicate that. One person may have one idea of like, for example, if we're painting a picture together. Right?
We joked about this earlier.
You know, communicate like, what are we painting? Are we painting a nature scene? Okay, great. Is it a sunset or is it a beach scene? Is it a jungle scene?
The joke earlier was like, imagine both of us are painting something together and she goes in thinking that we're drawing like
a forest.
A forest. Beautiful forest, trees everywhere, greenery, blue water on the outside of it, just gorgeous. And then here I come in on the corner and I start drawing a dragon. And he's got fire blowing out of his mouth and he's burning down all the trees, everything down. And she's like, I thought we were building something beautiful. I'm like, this is beautiful. This is what I think beauty is. Like, we didn't have any communication, but we started painting this thing together. And somehow we thought that, it's just going to turn out fine. But there was no intention into it.
There was no intentionality or discussion of desire. And those desires can be cyclical and change. I really think that people should be intentional in whether, that's meeting once a month or renewing your vows once a year. It's like, okay, what is my desire for this year or this season or this month? Harvard actually did this study where they found if people wrote down their desires and their dreams, those were like the only people that actually succeeded in having whatever it was. Mm-hmm. So even something as small as the intentionality of writing it down and journaling it and being very specific on your wants and desires. And, you hear this a lot with men and women. It's like, well, he should just read my mind and know what I want.
Right. Yeah. That happens all the time.
It's like, well, did you graciously share your desires? See,
half the time we don't know what we're thinking about, and we're supposed to know what you're thinking, right? Yeah.
So I think part of it is just being intentional, and also, I think we talked about this before, is just coming from a place of curiosity and not criticism. Mm-hmm. If somebody has something that's coming up with them that is new, or they want like a new chapter in their life, being supportive of that too. Mm-hmm. Not holding somebody back because you're also comfortable. Like, this is all we've known. This is all we've done. Right. And perhaps this person has a bigger vision or dream or desire for themselves or for you. Mm-hmm. And that takes a while to navigate. But, I think of someone like Harrison Ford, when we're talking about transitions, he was like a carpenter. Yeah. And was doing that when he went to play Star Wars. Right. But he was probably with his partner at the time is like, oh, well, what if you give up that carpenter check?
Right. It's a real thing.
Like, you're acting, we're not making
any money yet.
Making money.
If ever.
Like, this acting thing may or may not work out. And he ended up becoming the Harrison Ford.
Right. Right. And do you share the same level of risk-taking for something? And then, are you having conversations about it? And I think a lot of times people forget that when you start doing a new endeavor, you're not just doing the thing, you're becoming something, right? Like, people talk about getting married all the time, but they don't talk about becoming husbands and wives.
Yeah.
They talk about having kids all the time, but they don't talk about becoming fathers and mothers.
Yeah.
Right? If we get married, like that is a common goal for people. Like, let's get to the wedding. And I saw a coach talk about this online once before, and I started parroting it because I thought it was really, really important. People get really good at the interview, but they're horrible at keeping the job.
Yeah. And I think that happens a lot in the dating world too.
100%.
Yeah. It's like, oh, great first impression, wear that mask.
Yeah.
Be charming or be this, but they can't keep the job. And people are like, oh, what went wrong? Well, you just learned how to interview well, or put on that mask, or hold that container for a very short period of time.
Yeah. And it's essentially people trying to sprint a marathon.
Yeah.
It's like, you can look like anything.
For a short period of time.
I'll tell people. So I hate running, right? I ran my whole career to know that I hate it. I did it because it was necessary, but I was a horrible runner. I wasn't great at it. I always tell people I learned how to fight so I didn't have to run. Like, I'm going to run about 100 meters. And then after that, I'm going to turn around and fight you because I don't want to be exhausted by the time you catch me because I'm a bad runner. But I always said that, like, if you see two people running next to each other, you might see them in the beginning phases that they're even, right? Like they're on par. But what you don't know is what's going on inside of both of their engines. Like, even though they're going at the same pace, one person is coasting, just breezing by, and the other one might be redlining. And where you will find out is over time, when one starts passing the other and the other one starts slowing down or stops altogether. It happened in fights with me when I fought in New York. My buddy AJ James, if you're out there, love you, brother. Thanks for whipping my ass that one time in front of everyone in New York. Just an amazing martial artist. And I remember doing that fight and feeling like I was fighting a giant. Now, when you look at the fight on tape, it looks pretty even. From the outside looking in, like, oh, they look pretty even. They're holding their own. But people couldn't feel what it felt like to me on the inside. Like, I was revving my engine heavy, and he was working, but he wasn't working as hard as I was. Yeah. And I think people don't kind of like recognize that. They don't recognize the, the things from the outside aren't always what they seem. And sometimes some people are working harder than others in order to just keep up. Yeah. So.
Yeah, and I think it just takes time to figure that out.
Yeah. Just takes time. The intentionality part. What do you think when people are going through transition, whether it be with a partner or whether they're doing it on their own, whether they're crossing a certain threshold and letting one part of them die in order to let another one be born? What are some good practices as far as embracing that new chapter?
I think part of it is just realizing that we are all creatures of nature, and that's just a natural process of life. Like, if you look at life, it's cyclical. Right now we're in the fall, soon to be winter. Everything's dying. The leaves are falling, it's letting go. And then we're going to go into winter, and then we're going to regenerate and be reborn in the spring. If you look at the phases of the moon, it's still the moon, but every few days it's going through a different phase. So I think it is unhuman to think that we are statues, that we are not cyclical, and we are supposed to be stuck in this framework of time. I mean, even if you look at us from newborn to toddler to child to teenager to young adult to mature adult, like, we are evolved to change. Yeah. We are evolved to grow. We are meant to transition. And at some point that starts being scary. But it's just who we are. It's just part of nature. I think we get entangled with, our self-worth is because we identify with this one phase of our life. But that's like saying, okay, well, I'm the full moon. I always have to be the full moon. Well, you can go to the full moon to the waxing moon to the new moon to the crescent moon. Like, we have to realize that, like, this is just part of who we are, part of nature. And again, we are still those things.
Mm-hmm.
Like, even though we have this new phase and this new transition, we still are us.
Yes. Yeah.
We still are us. We don't lose our identity, and we don't lose our self-worth because we're in a new phase and a new transition.
Mm-hmm.
But somehow we have this like virus in our brain that thinks because we're in this new chapter, or again, because we can't see this chapter. And what I always say is everything fantastic is birthed in the dark, is created in the dark.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, from the universe and the Big Bang, from putting seeds into the ground, it is dark before something grows. To, a man and woman conceiving in the womb, that is dark. There is going to be a phase in your life where you don't see what that next step is. And you have to trust on your instincts. You have to trust your intuition. You have to trust your desires. It's like you have to kind of see in the dark and say, okay, I trust this is the next step. And even though it hasn't come yet, I may be in that season of like planting. I might be in the season of like something is growing and developing. But just like we're in the autumn now, like something has to die off in order for spring to come and something to be reborn and regenerate. Mm-hmm. And there has to come a point where we have to let go of that former version or moment in time. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things in our society is there's something programmed in us that think it's not going to be a better version of ourselves.
Right. Right. Well, because you're also using the metric that you measured yourself back then to measure the future you, but you don't know what the future you is going to be. So how can you measure the future you with the metrics of the old you?
Yeah.
Right.
Like the future you could be so much more happy and so much more fruitful and so much more of your soul's mission. Mm-hmm. It can be such a different aspect of, joy or prosperity, that there is a part of us that is kind of programmed to think it's not going to be as good. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of that is just the fear of the unknown. Mm-hmm. But also I feel like part of it is just, that fear of failure, but also the fear of something new. And what if it is successful?
Yeah.
And one of the things that we have to look at is, our identity. Part of the thing that's really challenging is you may have built your tribe around your old identity.
Yes.
And as humans, we are creatures that, the way you punish someone is like solitary confinement. Mm-hmm. So I also feel like there is this part of us as humans that feel if I step into the next level of success, if I step into a new identity, who am I going to lose along the way?
Right.
Because my identity has been tied to this tribe of people that have a quote unquote similar identity. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I think part of it is the fear of losing the bonds or the connection or the support.
Yeah.
But I also believe in having faith. And as you move into that next level, you're going to find out who your true support really was, because the people who really love you and care for you are going to celebrate you.
Sure. Yeah.
They're going to celebrate you in your success. You always you think about like, oh, well, my ride or dies are there in the hard times. We don't talk about like true connection as people that are going to help celebrate you in your success.
Right.
And sometimes me working with successful women, that's one of their biggest fears. Mm. It's like, the more successful I am, the more isolated I'm going to be. Yeah. Or it's okay for me to be successful in my career, but if I'm successful in my relationship, I don't have that common bond of being with others that maybe aren't successful in that, or vice versa. Some women are really successful in their relationships, but as they grow and expand and start making more money and becoming more prosperous, they don't have that commonality of people who maybe are blessed in the relationships, but aren't blessed in like the financial prosperity aspect. Mm-hmm. So we can get into these fear dynamics where we really even define success in these very niche things.
Right, right. We'll be back right after this short break, but I just wanted to take this moment to say thank you so much for being fans and listening to our podcast. And if you'd like to hear more about what we're doing, anything from retreats to personal coaching, to ebooks and courses that are coming out, please get on our email list. You'll get a chance to be the first to learn about the exciting things that we have to offer. Tanja and I are really excited about being able to coach both men, women separately and together to allow you to have the best life that you can have. And we all know that no one does this thing alone. And if you have a coach that truly understands your goals and needs, can get you where you want to be, then your life will change and transform in a magnificent and huge way. And we'd love to be able to help you out. So click the link below to join our email list, and we will see you soon. Now back to the show. It's interesting with the tribal dynamics, because especially I noticed this with martial artists, because if you come up with a martial artist and you've gotten good, it took time, which means you were in this community for a while, developing bonds with people that look at you a certain way. I had a client who was really, he was at a crossroads, right? He's a professional fighter, and he's like, he knows he only has a couple of years left. And he was quite upset that people only really ask about him when they're asking about his career, about his fighting, about his profession. Like, when's the next fight? Who are you fighting next? What weight are you going to be at? And he was like, I just wish people would ask me about me. And so I looked at him and go, okay, well, let's meet tomorrow and go train, or let's meet tomorrow and like go have a session. We can chat about it. He goes, oh yeah, sure. But hey, do you want to go do the open mat before we go? You want to go train before we go do the thing? And I looked at him, I paused. I'm like, you realize what you just did, right? You're upset at people for identifying you as a martial artist. And yet when I'm attempting to have a relationship with you that doesn't have anything to do with martial arts, the first thing you want to do is go do martial arts.
Yeah. Because
you are reaffirming your identity, and perhaps your fear of people leaving you has more to do with how you're projecting out to them than what they actually are. And maybe you could give some of your friends a little more credit, because they would ask you perhaps about more things in your life if you actually shared more things about your life other than your next competition, your next fight. And this is not to say that people should just go leave your tribes.
No,
right?
Not at all.
Far from it.
I think that's one of the underlying fears that people don't think about.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about death, I mean, human beings we're tribal creatures. We have it hardwired in our DNA that if we lose our tribe, we're going to die. Yeah. Because it at one point in our evolution, that was true. If you lived out in the wild, tribal creatures were these hairless, you know, upright apes that aren't very strong, right? We don't have a whole lot of protection. Our biggest protections are brains that can predict a future, our ability to communicate and share that, and the fact that we can work together as a result of that. And if you are kicked out of a tribe, then that meant death, because we don't survive very well by ourselves in the wild. We still have that programming. So I completely understand why people are afraid of that. But that fear may or may not be true. And if it is true, then those are people that just need to go to the back of your bus instead of get off it. You know, I heard a guy say this earlier. You know, most people think about like kicking people out of your life, right? Yeah. Like, but if you imagine your life being a bus, it's like you have some people that are right in the front of the bus to help you actually navigate. Yeah. They're like, wherever you want to go, I'll tell you when to go left or right. I'm looking at the GPS. You got people in the back seat that are just along for the ride. They support you from far, give you a high five, but they're not really helping you, but they're not getting your way either. You have other people in your life that are literally at the back of the bus. They're following you. They're looking at you. They might be like catcalling from the back, but they're family, they're friends. You like them enough, you love them enough to still have them at the periphery, but they don't get to tell you where to go. Yeah. They're not at the GPS. They're not telling you where to drive. And then there's few that just get off the bus. And to be okay with that transition in your life, because ultimately, don't you want people to like love and support you for who you actually are, not the person, not the avatar that you pretend to be, or the old version of you, the old version of you that you no longer are. Yeah. And then how exhausting is it for you to keep up an identity that no longer exists in you? How much of your energy and time and resources are you burning out just to hold on to a part that, if you're really honest with yourself, you would let go. Yeah. You know? And I think that's really a point I'd like to share too. And this is very much important thing in our dichotomy. And I think we talked about this a little bit.
One example is I have 2 coaches that I've utilized because I use coaches myself to grow and expand. And one, as I grew and expanded, really reached out to me and she's like, I'm happy for you. I'm excited for you. I see where you're going. You've been on this billboard in New York City, and I'm really like proud of this next evolution of you. And then there was another one that, reached out and just the results weren't as positive. And I think one thing that we have to be mindful of too is really finding people that really want the best for us long term. And that might be, and not just in the moment. And that might be even that, person that like gives you the hard, honest truth when you don't want to hear it, because that may not feel great in the moment, but long term, they really want what's best for you.
Right.
In long term, they might really see these things that you don't see. So I think also finding friends or family members or coaches that really want the best for you, not just now, but long term, really want to see you succeed. And sometimes will tell you those things that may be really hard. And I think sometimes we may dismiss people that tell us things we don't want to hear.
Sure.
But it's really because they're worried about their long-term success. And I think parenting's a lot that way.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. That child might be upset that, they don't want to hear it.
Right. Yeah.
But they're worried and concerned about their long-term success because they really want to see them grow and live up to their fullest potential.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to have that discernment when you're picking friends or allies or coaches or partners, that it's not someone that just wants to see you succeed now, but really wants to see you succeed long term. And that might mean that you have to grow and develop into something different or redefine yourself or reinvent yourself, because that's what's best for you long term. And you had that example that you were sharing earlier with the quarterback.
Yes. The Tebow effect, as they like to call it. So where I first heard about it was studying the ecological dynamics of motor learning. A guy named Greg Souders in Maryland, shout out to Greg Souders, and from Standard BJJ, turning me on to this way of learning, the ecological approach, and use the constraints-led approach as the specific model that we use. And then in the model, language is really important. So one of the examples he uses is a thing called attractors. And an attractor is like a attractor pattern is like a behavior that you've acquired over time, usually reinforced by success, that may or may not be necessarily good for your long-term or your future you. So Tebow was a great quarterback in college because he was winning, and he was reinforced for the behavior of winning. But he had something in his mechanics of his throw that made his throw not as efficient, made it a little bit slow. And coaches most likely saw it in college, but they didn't do anything about it because he was winning. And so because they wanted him to win, because in order to win, that would get him into the NFL. Again, we're talking about the interview, right?
And it was good for them.
And it was good for them, right? Because we want him to win because it makes us look good right now. And so they let that mechanical error go because he was winning. He gets to the NFL and then realizes, like, for instance, if it was like 0.4 seconds slower than it should, means nothing in college, but means everything in the NFL, because now these athletes are bigger, stronger, faster, more skilled at the craft. And that 0.4 seconds was the difference between throwing the ball and getting sacked or getting it intercepted. And now he's in the NFL and he's a horrible quarterback. But now he has to create a new movement pattern while he's at the top of his craft, going against the top people in the world at what he does. And that's too late. So it's the same thing we're talking about here. Is like, you've got to be, when you're training, you're doing anything, whether it be training for your martial arts, or you're looking at your finances, or you're looking at your partner, there's things that are going on that you're dealing with to make the current you happy and fulfilled. But then you also have to look at what is the future you going to need in order to be fulfilled. So the current relationship, what it needs right now in order to thrive in the first interview stages. And then there's what is the future relationship going to need in order to be able to go long-term, 1, 2, 3, 10 years, a lifetime. And we don't often think about that in the interview phase. We think about, let's just get the girl. Let's get her to go home with me. Let's get her to go out with me. And now you've gotten the interview, but now we're in the Tebow effect. You did the thing to get into the game. And now when you're in the game, you don't know how to stay in the game. You don't know how to stay in the NFL. Mm-hmm. So I think that's analogous to not only football, but it's analogous to everything that we do in life. When it comes to our relationships or our skills or our finances.
Yeah.
Got to plan for the you now and the future you later, or the future us, the us now and the us later.
Yeah. And I think that can even apply to people, professional athletes or people who win the lottery. It's like this get rich quick overnight. Overnight, I expect this major transition. Overnight, I expect to have this thing. And even if you get it overnight, if you don't have the skills or the resources, or you can't even carry that vibration energetically to hold that level of wealth and to sustain it and make it grow and nurture into more, then you're going to eventually lose it. And they even talk about how lottery winners or a lot of professional athletes don't have that money within a couple of years.
Yeah.
And you're talking millions to tens of millions to hundreds of millions of dollars. They automatically revert back to what they know.
Yes.
And this is what we're saying, because again, they are attracted and connected to the identity they had.
Yes.
And they can't get past to their core identity. So even if they're blessed with millions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars or this great contract, they haven't learned how to grow into their new future self and how to hold and contain that energy. There is this fear, or that probably takes over. And also it's what they know.
Yeah. The pattern. You were talking about that in relation to fairy tales and how the instant transformation overnight, the shadow side of a fairy tale that gets taught to women. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. One of my things that I talk about in my upcoming course called the Cinderella Scandal is just that, the prince is going to save me, and overnight I'm going to be the servant girl princess, and then I'm going to be with the man that has the castle. And it's just something that we're really ingrained and taught, that it's going to be this rags to riches overnight story. And really, even people who rarely get that story, when they get it, it tends not to be fruitful.
Right. Why is that?
I think it's like old patterns. I think it's old vibrations. It's like if you're not used to dealing with and holding a certain vibration of wealth or wealth consciousness or abundance, you're going to give it away. You're going to feel undeserving. You're going to feel unworthy. You're not going to know how to manage it. You're not going to understand the energetics or the mechanics of money. And then over time, it's just going to diminish.
Yeah, so that's where your tie-in is with money and relationships, that level of consciousness that needs to be, both of them need to be addressed through.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So the same lessons that they're learning through the fairy tales about the happily ever after wedding and marriage is the same thing that they're perhaps manifesting in their financial abundance.
Yeah.
Fascinating. That's fascinating. Yeah, that's and those are old patterns because we get taught those as kids, and we have to break out of them. And it was fascinating, and we talked about this a little bit in the last podcast. But most of the fairy tales that you wrote about, and our course is coming up. It's a phenomenal course. The level of detail and the amount of care that's been taken to make this course what it is phenomenal. And so, being there right as she's developing it, I get a chance to look at all of it, and it's fascinating as a guy knowing about the fairy tale stories like Cinderella and Snow White, Sleeping Beauty. But then when I would go to look back and I go, I don't know if I've ever seen Cinderella all the way through or Snow White or any of the princess movies. I think I saw more of them as I became an adult because I had friends who had kids. And then I would go with them to watch the modern day movies. But even though I had probably seen none of them all the way through, I inherently knew all the stories.
Yeah.
Because embedded in those stories, the stories that women have to deal with, embedded on the other side of that are the things that men have to fulfill in the world. It's like the Prince Charming is not a great guy, but he does have the wealth and the resources and the fame. And so we're kind of taught, it's like, if you want to get that princess, you got to go get that money, go get that suit, go look that way. And none of those things are inherently evil. Like, there are great resources. If you're a good person, you have more of those resources, you're going to do more into the world. Like, abundance is still a great thing, but they're not the only sources. And matter of fact, they're not the primary sources of knowing if somebody is worthy in their heart. If they're going to be if they got money, but they're not generous, then how's that even going to affect you as a woman? Right? If he is physically fit and takes care of himself, but he's a narcissist, then he is basically, all he cares about is his own body. He doesn't care anything about you and what you need. But we're all conditioned, including guys, to go in and be like, if I get all these things, then the princess or the queen is going to show up. And then what they basically do is, okay, well, we're attracting people that either need to be rescued or only want me for my resources. And as soon as I lose any of those things, then I also lose the relationship. So we're both coming from two different sides of this story. And somehow in the modern day world, we think we're enemies to one another, when really we're all playing the same game and kind of getting played until we learn how to play the game.
And I think we see what's unveiled. And this programming that we've all been taught, that for whatever reason, that isn't necessarily the best programming. And realizing that, like, at any moment, and this is what we've talked about, identity, at any moment, we can choose a different narrative and a different story. At any moment, we could recreate ourselves. And again, that might not be the rags to riches overnight story, but it could be the step-by-step, moment by moment. You're not going to lose 100 pounds overnight. You're not going to, but can you lose it in a year? And that's the thing. I think step by step, they say inch by inch, life is a cinch.
What's that from?
I don't know.
Sounds like a fairytale, Dr. Seuss or something like that.
So it's moment by moment, step by step. If we make that conscious choice to evolve and grow and become to that best version of ourselves, which is the healthier, wealthier, and wealth does, in all forms of abundance, like physical wealth, emotional wealth, financial wealth, like we can evolve into that. But I think it's also realizing that, like, it's okay for identities to change as long as we're putting attention and intention on that growing and evolving and into, a better version of ourselves. And being able to let go of what either we can't hold on to anymore, or what life is showing us we can't hold on to anymore, and really being able to integrate, like, who that next person is.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I'll say this one other thing, and I'm sure her and I could talk all night. This is how this whole podcast started, by the way, everyone. The fact that we've had these conversations every night since we met, and we're like, we should just record them and share them with people because we think it's interesting and could be helpful. So that's why we do this. I wanted to share one kind of idea about what was helpful for me in my transition, and what's been helpful for other men, and I'll assume other women as well. That when you're going through that hard transition, something was very helpful for me is to start thinking about, how can I give my wisdom to others, or how can I share my wisdom with others? And sharing could be you charging people for it, or it could be just you volunteering your time. That's your decision to make. But you getting to the point where you're at that transition where you're allowing this part of you to die that's been around for a long time. There's a ton of wisdom that you gained in that period, and the transition of you dying to become the next version, you have so much that you could share with people. And I've always noticed that if I'm really focused on me, then it can often be very hard to be happy. But if I can take my focus off of me for a little bit, take that load off, and just like look out to my world and be like, who could use my help? Who could use my guidance, my specific skill set, my uniqueness in the world? How can I go give that, or have someone receive that out in the world, and then help them grow, help them not maybe make the same mistakes that I did. there's something very powerful about that. I say this in martial artists because when martial artists get hurt, they feel, again, they can't be on the mat. They can't be that same athlete, that jock they were before. But that same guy, the most I learned on the floor was the hurt brown belt in the corner who's all busted up. Mm-hmm. But I go over there and ask him a question about an arm bar. And next thing you know, he's telling me a philosophy of life that can help me with my relationships, mm-hmm. So he hit me with a double whammy because he's had life. Yeah. He's had experiences he can share. And then when I'm gracious to him, you can just see him light up. So we're both getting something out of it. And it's a beautiful transition when you can let that part go to allow that other side of you grow, and use like these archetypes, like and for women, the crone.
Yeah.
Right? You
go from the maiden to the mother to the crone. And the crone translated as the crown, where like she became like the crown or the head or the leader based off her wisdom and her expertise. And she really helped lead and guide women based off that. And that's been one of my desires in missions in life, is like to help women evolve and grow into the greatest version of themselves. And even though I'm not quite at that crone stage yet, like I really love those societies where it's like sharing your inherent wisdom, which I think is like such a beautiful story of what the crone or the crown meant. And now most of the women that like have really celebrated me and desire, like cherished me and helped me become that version of themselves, tend to be a few generations older, and they've just brought me so much wisdom. And then one of my favorite stories about the masculine and really fighting your own demons that I heard once, it's rite of passage. And we've talked about in our culture, we don't have these rites of passage anymore.
We don't.
But there's this beautiful ceremony that I don't remember the name of the tribe, but it was a Native American tribe. And when a boy was like 12 or 13, he would have to go into the forest blindfolded and fight off whatever came his way. And he'd have to stay all night. And he goes, and they sit him on this rock in silence. And they're like, whatever you do in order to pass the test. And again, I think this applies to like being able to like see in the dark, or which is interesting that we're talking about, seeing in the future. So this young 12, 13-year-old boy would have to sit there blindfolded in the dark. And he's like, you have to be a man of integrity. Do you promise you won't take the blindfold off? And he's like, yes. And he's like, no matter what you do, you're man enough that you can fight whatever creature demon happens in the night. But this is a walk of faith. And this is you stepping into manhood. And this boy sits there, right? And he's hearing everything, the creatures of the night, right? From the crickets to the owls to the wolves howling to the coyotes to the bear, hearing the hiss of the snake,
Scary stuff.
But really, he's fighting his own fear. He's fighting his own demons. He has to be courageous and fight not just what's there, but the perception of what's there.
Let's go. Yes.
And he has to trust that he, like as this young 12 or 13-year-old boy, can defend that or fight that off.
And trust that the men who told him he was ready were right.
Were right.
Yes.
So the beautiful part of that story for me that like really touches my heart is in the morning as the sun rises, the boy takes the blindfold off, and there was his father and a tribe of men there the whole night sitting with him.
Yes. Let's go.
So he was supported by the elders of the tribe, but the whole ceremony is to give him that induction into manhood where he has to fight his own demons and his own darkness and have faith that he's ready. But all along, there's these tribe of men that are there for him, but he doesn't know it. And it's like one of the most beautiful like symbolisms.
That is beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
So I think that again is giving to someone else and helping someone else grow into their greatness or their evolution through community and through connection and sharing that wisdom. And helping people develop into their greatest potential. And I think, it's just a beautiful ceremony that I wish like all men had, because it's then trusting them to like believe that, have faith, like to trust. And part of that is like just fighting those own insecurities and demons and what ifs that may or may not be real.
Yes.
That you're still sitting with that fear all night.
Yeah, all proverbial night.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a great reminder that none of us do any of this alone. That you don't have to have all the answers. Like, if you're in part of a good community, people that really love and cherish and respect you, that want to see the best of you, you don't have to have all the answers. I know you feel alone. And this comes to men, women, whatever. You may feel alone, but you're not.
Yeah.
There's people in your life that really care, love, cherish, and respect you and want the best for you. They want to see the best version of yourself. And if you don't have as many of them as you think, then you have communities you can plug into. You have coaches, the people that really desire to see the best out of you. This is the reason why we do the work we do. We have communities that we build and support. Whatever community you decide to be a part of, find someone that really wants to see not only the you now, but the you later. And just trust. Once you make the decision to join any of these groups, trust that they have your best interest in mind, not only for now, but for your future.
Make sure they have your best interest for the future.
Okay. It's been an awesome podcast. Episode 2. Yeah. Thank you all so much for
pleasurable. Thank you for connecting, and we'll see you on the website or next week.
Yeah, see you next time. Check the show notes for upcoming events. We have courses coming up. I have a Muay Thai retreat coming up in Costa Rica at the end of 2025 in December. And you have 3 courses coming out. Of course, a book and 2 courses. You want to talk to them a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I'll have a complimentary ebook coming up in the next couple of days. There'll be a 8 or 9 part master class that is available called the Cinderella Scandal. There'll be a second part that talks about the Prince Charming scandal, and then also a 6-week Conscious Queen course coming up, along with I will have a retreat in a chateau in early April in France.
So be on the lookout for that.
Too.
A lot of great things coming in. Again, we appreciate your support. We are going to continue to keep bringing content from the Dagger
And the Rose.
and She Conversations. Take care, everyone.
Take care.